Before deciding to write a paper, research paper, I think it's worthy that if we spend some time in determining whether the research that we have done is actually publishable or not. It can save us a lot of time, and it can also minimize the frustration and disappointment that we get from the rejection that we receive from journals. Right? So, what do I mean by publishable research? Right? So, publishable research is basically the content or the research question that we are asking. It has to be something that our the editors, peer reviewers also find it's worthy, right? So that is what we need. I mean by publishable research. So how do we know the work that we are doing is really interesting to others? So I'm going to give you some commonly used criteria by editors in order to determine is this work is worthy of publishing or not. Now, for all of us, the research that we have done is important. Right? Most of us feel that way, from our own perspective, rightfully so, because we have spent a lot of time in studying the literature and writing the proposal, conducting research, and so on. And most of the academic research, in an entire semester or even an entire year has been spent. So naturally, when we look at our paper, we find that this is really useful. We would like to think it's useful, and otherwise we wouldn't have done it, right? But we must be able to be objective and evaluate our own research, whether is it worthy of publishing or not. Now, this is not as easy that I'm putting at as easy as the way I'm putting, right? Because to judge our own work as whether it's worthy or not, it can be difficult for many of us, and of course can be a source of disappointment and frustration too. But like I said, we need to be objective enough to decide that whether is it really worthy or not. From my own experience, I have decided painfully, of course, that many of my earlier research work that I have done was not worthy of publication. I'll tell you why as we are going through. Especially, for example, the work that I have done as part of my post-graduation work, I found it not worthy. Now, when we say not worthy of publication, I don't mean by that the work that we have done is not good. That need not be the only reason, right? There are other reasons too why our research become having less chance of publishing in a journal. Now, in order to put that reason, I just wanted to give you a broad understanding of how you can classify any research that we are doing, because this has got something to do with how editors determine if our work is publishable or not. That is, this classification is basically the National Science Academy in India they've classified all research into three in terms of looking at quality and so on. So this three way of research, the classification which classifies any research into three is confirmatory research, incremental research, and path-breaking research. Now, what is a confirmatory research? Confirmatory research is any research with the aim of confirming a finding that is already established. Say, for example, a new finding comes. A researcher have come up with a newer finding. Like if you look at like 10-15 years before, the newer phenomenon that is found to be related to patients' pain perception is kinesiophobia. That is fear of movement. Now, before that, we have not thought of that kinesiophobia as a factor that can influence pain. But a decade ago, this is some researchers have found that this is really a important fact. When a group of researchers comes up with a new finding in science, it is expected that the findings are confirmed by other researchers. What they mean by reproduce, you need to replicate the research in multiple contexts and different places and different patient groups and so on, and that finding has to be confirmed. That is, a group of researcher comes up with a new finding, and that finding has to be confirmed, that reproduced in multiple places, in multiple settings, and then that finding would be more or less accepted. Now we have a good evidence to show that kinesiophobia to some extent can influence pain perception, and that is a confirmatory research where you confirm the findings of other researchers. And the next type of research is incremental research. Now, incremental research is any research that takes the particular knowledge in a particular area to a next level. Right. So far, we have known that kinesiophobia is influencing perception. Now, in our research, we found that kinesiophobia is specifically more important in a particular patient age group, especially in a elderly, or in women, or in men. Right. If a finding comes like that, I'm just making up just to make you understand. Hypothetically, I'm giving this example, right? So if that happens, so not only it's confirmed, and a new knowledge is added to the existing knowledge. That kind of research is known as incremental research. You understand? And the third type is the path-breaking research. This research changes everything that we know about, or possibly it gives you a new direction. Say, for example, even in the pain, if you look at, like, previously, before gate control theory, the theory that is based theory that explained pain was a specificity theory. Basically, that theory has explained that pain is primarily due to tissue damage, right? But later, as new research has come, you got a gate control theory, and you have a lot of findings from amputated patients where phantom pain and all new findings have come. That to some extent, it can be classified as a path-breaking research, because that research has changed the way of or shown the new way of understanding pain perception. It has broadened our understanding. Now we know that pain can be perceived even without tissue damage. A lot of work done by such as scientists like Dr. Ramachandran, who has done extensive work, and he has his research work, we could probably say as an example, as it's a path-breaking research that has brought in newer understanding about pain, whereas in which pain can be perceived without tissue damage, right? So this is what broadly research can be classified. Now, obviously, we know that path-breaking research comes usually at a later stage of a research career, or if someone is genius and very intelligent, they can come up with a very young age. There are quite a few examples for that. Now, we have to see in our research what type of research that we are doing. If you look at academic setting, mostly confirmatory research, and to a lesser extent, again this is my view, to a lesser extent, incremental research is done. Path-breaking research in academic setting that I am familiar with, very rarely it is done. Now, in confirmatory research, there is, if you're doing a confirmatory research, you need to know that you are running a risk of reducing the likelihood of your paper getting published. And I don't mean to say confirmatory research is not useful. It is useful, right? So I'm not saying it has a lesser value, or it has a publication potential is less, but that's a caveat to it. When you're doing a confirmatory research on a subject which already sufficient studies or already confirmed it, right? So if you keep repeating that again and again, at some point of time editors would decide that there is not much information is necessary. We already know what it is. Say for example, some of you may be familiar with constraint induced movement therapy in stroke that is commonly used, right? Now there are hundreds of research has been already been done, and we know systematic reviews are available, and we already know to what extent constraint induced movement therapy is useful for patient and which group of patients, right? What outcome it improves, we know much better, fairly clear, right? And at this point of time, after all these hundreds of research is done, if you're conducting another study on constraint induced movement therapy, and it becomes a problem, because if your finding doesn't add anything to what we already know, then the editor is more likely to reject it, because we already know that it has certain effect, it improves certain outcome, and your study finding doesn't add anything to what we already know, right? So when confirmatory research is when it is useful, when it has higher potential for publication, is that when during early stage. So if you look at 10-15 years before, when constraint induced movement therapy was just introduced, a lot of people got interest. At that time, if you are doing there, it is confirmatory, yes, because Edward Taub, I think in late 80s or in 90s, yes, come up with. I'm sorry about the year, I'm really not so sure, but in the past 2 decades, right? So if you're doing in late 90s and 2000s and so on, a lot of people have done research on CIMT, right? The constraint induced movement therapy. At that point of time, confirmatory research has its value, right? But beyond certain level it doesn't. So how do we know that whether the confirmatory research that I am doing is got good potential? From your literature review you will know, right? If you need to see what we already know and see why your study results might be different, might add something more, right? You need to have that reason, otherwise it's going to be difficult. Now incremental research is always runs a lesser risk of rejected, right? Or the higher potential for publication, because your study is adding something to what we already know. Now unfortunately, in our context, I see this problem of parent article, especially in an academic setting, that everywhere people ask for parent in most places, right? I don't know if it's everywhere. The idea of parent article is that it is a system that exists in academic setting. The research supervisor, especially in India, I hope so, right? I really don't know about in other countries, is that the research supervisors, even exam evaluation committee, and some of them have also pointed out today's discussion that when ethical committee are asking for, do you have a parent article, right? So basically the idea is that you are doing something not totally out of your mind. You have to stick with what we already know, but this practice of having a parent article can be detrimental for our research publication, because if there's certain information is already available, we are just following everything that what they have done, then what are we adding to existing knowledge, right? And to a greater extent it runs the risk of plagiarism too, right? Repeating a same study what is done in another setting, saying that in Indian setting we need the same study, that's not sufficient argument. We got to make more convincing argument why such studies are necessary, right? So you got to be careful to avoid this issue of using a parent or something already done. You're trying to do you're trying to reproduce it, you're running a risk of not having potential to add to what previous studies have done, right? So that's an important issue that you need to address if you're planning for a research proposal, right? You really got to address that. You can try to improvise from other studies that they have done. Let us say you can say these studies they have done, they found this research, however their methodology is different and they got a different study patient group, we are looking at another group, right? And this and all has to be convincing. If if you're just saying so but your data actually doesn't show that it's different, now editor will take a call that this study just looks the same, so why would I want to publish a study which is already similar to other studies exist, right? So keep that in mind. And the last one is path-breaking research. There is a bigger scope for path-breaking research, but like I said, it doesn't happen, or at least you really have to be very experienced and have a lot of research experience to come to a path-breaking stage. But I really hope some of you are doing it. Right. So when you're evaluating, when you're evaluating the publishability of your paper, what are all the things that you want to ask yourself? There are 3 questions I put there. Again, something which we already discussed, but just ask yourself this, right? Whether your paper has the potential to make significant contribution to existing body of knowledge. I want to emphasize again, in order to answer this question, you can't just answer saying yes, right? Because it's our own paper, right? This answer you got to be objective, and it has to come from your extensive reading of literature. And I see there is a problem, because unfortunately many academic research was not work was not derived from a comprehensive and extensive reading of literature review. It was done in a hush manner. That's a very little time. Then we just take few research supporting and make a research project out of it, right? If you're doing that, you're going to have a hard time answering this question. So there is no other way, there is no other shortcut for literature review. We have to spend a lot of time, otherwise you will find a lot of difficulties in here. So the 3 questions is what it says true, right? Meaning that your methodology, your methods that you have used, is design that you have used, the tools that you have, the measurement tools you have used to measure data, all have to have credibility. Proper design, good measurement tools if you use, then your results are more likely to be close to true, right? And is it new, right? Obviously you got to have this novelty component, because most editor looks for it. Now I wouldn't say all study has to have novelty, but you still have to work on putting something that is new in order to increase the publishability potential of your research. And if it's true and it's new, and more importantly, whether both of these things are important. Now, important to whom? Here, not necessarily important to editor, but it has to be something that your editor thinks important, right? The findings, what is important, the finding has to be relevant to a larger population, international audience. It has to be relevant, and this is something a big problem across the globe, right? Something everybody's studying, want to solve this. And in your introduction, you should be able to convincingly argue that what you're doing is new, what you're doing is important, and so on, right? So you need you need to judge more objectively that your paper is really address a new issues, and also it's important, not necessarily new issues, but there is something new in your paper that attracts interest of the reader, right? So you can see these are all the common reasons for non-acceptance, and you will have to make sure that this is you'll have to make sure that your paper doesn't fall under any of these criteria. Let me briefly describe these criteria. The first one is the findings do not make significant contribution to body of knowledge. That is what is already known, right? Now editor makes a call whether the work that you have done is making significant contribution to the body of knowledge or not. Now you will need to convince the editor, if at all you're putting your paper, that it really makes significant contribution. Like I said, confirmatory research, as beyond certain level may not be perceived as making significant contribution, and if you're doing incremental research, that can really be useful. So you got, and again, to ensure this you don't fall in this criteria, your paper, that you really got to do a good proper literature review. You should have read systematic reviews on the topic that you are doing. This article is too similar to one that is already published elsewhere. Now this is a problem. This is a problem. How? Because like I said, if you're using a parent article or something, if there are quite a few other articles that looks very similar to what you have done, then editors wouldn't be much interested, because there is already a article that addresses the same issue. So and keep in mind, most editors and reviewers are familiar with what articles that have already been published, and more robust studies with similar findings have been published. That is there are studies addressing the same question like yours, but they have addressed with a much better methodology, much better research design, right? Then which means there is better answers are already available, then your paper doesn't go through. Say for example, if you are evaluating a treatment, you are conducting a quasi experimental study, but if the same question is addressed by a experimental study in RCT, and that is already available, then the editor wouldn't be interested, because a similar questions have already been addressed with a better methodology. Again, you got to do a good literature review in order to avoid this. And the next is, the other researchers and authors are unlikely to use and cite these findings. So this is also one of the reasons for common your work will become will be, the publishability potential will be low, because as you know, the impact factor, editor is very responsible to improve the impact factor of a journal. Now impact factor improvement or increasing impact factor very much depend upon to what extent the articles published in a journal is being cited by other researchers. They consider this is important work and others are citing it, right? So if you're doing a work that are less likely to be cited by others, that is in the editor's judgment, if it is that, then it wouldn't go. So if you're asking me how can I say that my findings are less likely to cite, again, if your relevance is poor, or if you are addressing a problem that a rare problem, or that is not considered as important by most of the researchers, so naturally they're going to consider, they're not going to cite your work. So if you're doing work in a problem that is important, considered important across the globe, then you're likely to be cited. And also if you're doing a work that may be very important, but if it has a very local significance to a particular geographical location, only if it is significant, then it's going to be a problem. And the message has little relevance or usefulness to readers beyond the setting of the study. Now this is an important reason they reject, but as Indian researchers, we have to understand this, and we have to fight hard to ensure that studies done in India has relevance to other settings too. Now we really have to write an introduction and the discussion in such a way showing that how your study findings can be relevant to other settings. Now I personally have faced this problem quite a lot, because most of the research work that I do is very specific. I'm specific to Indian context, that I'm addressing cultural relevance of outcome measures. My PhD is on developing a new outcome measure for India, in which I've evaluated several Western developed outcome measures for its relevance in India, and India related problem such as squatting and so on. So I've had issues in convincing editors, but most editors are kind enough to accept, but they wanted me to explain why others should care, why people outside of the India, which is their audience, why they would be interested in, right? So we really have to write it well in a way that it convinces the editor. So I'm not saying this is a reason that if you do India specific study it gets rejected. I'm not saying that, but you have this additional challenge of convincing, and it is very much doable. Like I said, I've done it, and it was challenging initially, but it's and if you explain well, most editors in my experience have readily accepted the importance of it, right? So but we should be able to do this, right? So these are all, that's all I have. So I really suggest again to determine this before you start writing the paper, so that the number of rejections and common reasons for rejection can be reduced, so that your paper will have a, that you will choose the right paper. You may have done few research, so you will choose the right paper to publish. Like I said, I have published now about 15 to 20 studies, but I have done close to 50 studies so far, and student work and many work that I have done, many of which I have found later is not publishable, sometimes because it has passed its time, right? At that time that question is very important, but in 5 years or so that question becomes irrelevant, and there are better studies with better designs have come, so therefore the study does not have usefulness. So you need to be objective enough to accept that the study has lost its value, not necessarily because it's not a good study, because of other reasons too, like the research has progressed far ahead and it no longer is relevant now, right? So we need to accept when it is having less publication chance, not to take it personally, so that you will work on articles that has a higher probability of publication. Remember, this is a subjective decisions. This is your own judgment, so you try to be as objective as possible. And the fact is, you will see some papers which doesn't fit into criteria which I've said, it's still published. You will see some papers which are really good that's not getting published, that is there, but that's I think that is in the that is the extreme cases, right? There are many other reasons, right? But still, as if you are beginner, want to publish a study, this would be a useful guideline for you. So that's all I have. Again, if you're having questions, feel free to use the Google form I posted in course website, and ask me questions or comments or feedback, anything you have. So we will meet again next week.